Okay, we'll start now a little bit of a shorter shir. We'll go to finish סימן Pei Beis, a few important points that are relevant to סימן Pei Beis from where we stopped in Yud Aleph, Yud Beis last time. And we started dealing with the topic of Schiras Reshus from a goy. So, in Sif Yud Gimel points out that you cannot rent from a goy ba'al korchoi against his will, even if the goy used to rent it out in the past. Now, the first question that comes up is, how do you rent from a goy ba'al korchoi? The Alter Rebbe doesn't describe what will be ba'al korchoi. If you look in Mishnah Berurah of Kotel Lamed Aleph, he quotes from the Bach. What does it mean? What's ba'al korchoi? How do you do it? It means you just go, you put it on the guy's table, and you tell him, this is the money for renting your property, and you walk out. Now, what happens in the Sharat Tziyun, the Mishnah Berurah says, obviously, what happens if the guy picks up the money and takes it? So then, even though he didn't really want to do it milchatchila, it still works. Why is that? A simple halach in Choshen Mishpat. If somebody is forced to sell something and he gets money for it, it is considered a sale. So over here, ba'al korchoi means that he's refusing to accept payment for it. If he accepted payment for it, then obviously even though it might be ba'al korchoi, the kinyan, the mekach will still be done. The question is, why is it that by a yid there are certain scenarios that we saw in סימן Samach Zayin where you could do it against the owner's will? It's because ultimately the concept of kfir by mitzvahs could only apply to a mitzvah, but a yid, it's a mitzvah to be mishtatev and aid to a certain element. And therefore, there's a kfir could work by a yid in such a scenario. But over here, there's definitely no chiyuv of any shape or form on the guy to be part of this eidav, and therefore, or to rent out to you. And therefore, there's no obligation for him to do it, and you can't force him. Now, who could you rent from? Could you rent from other people? That's in Sif Yud Daled. You could rent from the guy's wife, you could rent from the people who live in his house, b'nei beisai, or from schira yulakitoi. Schira is somebody, schira is somebody who works for the whole year. Lakitoi comes from leket, from somebody who works in collecting in the field, so he's only working during warmer months or colder months, depending on what crop he's collecting. But either of them could work. The Alter Rebbe adds over here in parentheses, and this will come across in the next few sifim also, shebe beisei. Schira yulakitoi is only schira yulakitoi that lives in the house. Soon see there's different opinions on that. What shebe beisei means. The Alter Rebbe takes the most strictest line of thinking in this. Schira yulakitoi only works when the schira yulakitoi is actually living in the guy's house or in the guy's chatzar. Then you could rent from them, whether it's the wife, whether it's the b'nei bais, even if the guy, the owner, is moiche against them. Why is that? For we know that the only reason why the dira of a guy is me'akev is because of shemal yilmedu mimaisav, and we want to encourage Jews to leave. So the same kishuf that the guy is scared of is schira yulakitoi will be scared of on his behalf. Now, schira yulakitoi doesn't specifically mean only these two examples. Yeah? These are examples of employees. These are not specific employees, because later you'll see from Gizbar HaMelech and Avodei HaMelech Haktanim and Avodei Avodav, this will be later on. And any employee, the Sharat Tziyun and Mishnah Berurah of Kotel Lamed Vav says any Shar Mesharsov, any other kind of Mesharsim also works. Now, what I mentioned that Alter Rebbe says Shebebesa here and in other places in the Siman, there is obviously some kind of definition what Schira L'Kita is. You could say the other extreme of the opinion is that if a person is employed by him, even if he doesn't live there or doesn't do anything, doesn't have a room over there of any sorts, he's still considered a Schira L'Kita. Alter Rebbe takes Shebebesa. If you look in Biur Agra over here, the lashon of Biur Agra, sheyachil lahaniach kelav shel Adonai. He has a place he could put the kelim of his balabas. You can't really medayik from it too much. The Biur Halacha and Dibra Maschil Oy Mischiroi brings from the Atzei Al Moigim that it refers to Schira L'Kita. It means anybody who has some form of entry reshus to go into the house or into the chatzar. Doesn't say he has to live over there, but Alter Rebbe pretty much takes the approach that he has to live over there. Now, what happens? By Yid?
For Yid to be a Schira L'Kita, that's why he's able to put the kelim over it.
Yeah. I'm saying is
By Yid, he will not like the ground.
the what? It's all five, when they have 5 Yidden over there, they're living over there. Alter Rebbe there also brings the concept of living.
No, Alter Rebbe says that the trick is to get close to the guy and until he agrees to give you like a place to play.
That's if you directly from him, then you become his Schira L'Kita, even if you don't put something over there. But for actual Schira L'Kita, because then you become like his Schira L'Kita, you already have a rights in his house to put something there. Seems like that would work, but in every other place it's Shebebesa. In every other, if from here going weiter, but it's all of them are in parentheses. In Segrayim, Alter Rebbe left them all in parentheses. What happens if the Schira L'Kita of the Goy happens to be a Yid? The Goy has a Jewish employee. How does it work? So, if you go based on the logic that Alter Rebbe brings us, because the same, you're going to be able to chase away the other Yidden from living there. That's not going to help. But the example that it's pretty clear that Alter Rebbe holds the Schira L'Kita could also be a Jew because all 5 of them could be Yidden. So you could look at Mishnah Berurah, it gives you a difference between the case of 5 and the case of 1, but I'm not going to get into it now. There is a different shittas in the poskim if a Schira L'Kita of a guy happens to be a Yid. So the Bis Yosef brings a mashma from the Rambam that it works. There's in Sefer Yeshua, Siman Yud Beis says it works, but it's obviously better if a guy has Goyish workers. And Yiddish workers, try to find a Goyish worker. Don't go for the Yiddish worker. The Pri Megadim in Siman Shin Samach Zayin right in the beginning says it works as long as it doesn't, as the Nachri is not Moiche. But the Atzei Al Moigim takes a more extreme approach, and he says that it doesn't work. According to it seems like it does work, yeah. Now, we know that Ein Shlichus La'akum. You can't appoint a goy as your shliach to do anything for you. Could a goy, but that's a Yid appointing a shliach, Ma'atem B'nei Bris, Av Shluchachem B'nei Bris. Could a goy appoint a shliach to deal with the schirus? So there's a chance of Chuvas Maram Shik in Chaim Siman Kuf Pei Beis and a bunch of other places also which discuss this, and they seem to take the approach that a goy could be memane another goy as his shliach for schilas reshus in this scenario, and the din of shlichus that there's no shlichus by goyim is only from a yid to a goy. But otherwise it does work. There are some opinions say it does not work. Now, who is the Schira L'Kita? So until now, we looked at Schira L'Kita is a person who works, who is employed. Later on, you'll see Avdei HaMelech, Gizbar HaMelech, who receives Pras from the Melech. That means there's some form of relationship, financial relationship between the owner and the person who's working, that he gets something from the owner. The in Shas Tshuva's Beis Shloime, Erechaim Siman Nun Hey, he says L'chatchila, you could only take you should only rent from an employee who gets paid a salary. Don't just take from any employee who works for him or who is doing work over there. If somebody is not getting a benefit from the owner and he's working over there, maybe, I don't know if slaves still get benefits, but if it's an employee who does not get benefits of some sort, or he is a person who serves, then not. What would be the simple example of somebody who is a schiroi v'lekitoi of some sort and works and does not receive payment if somebody's working only based on tips. Today it's all not anymore common, but if there was a concept of somebody who works and his whole work is based on receiving tips and not on receiving a salary, or he is working on a different form, if he's working on some form of commission or whatever it is, not straight from him, then he is not a paid employee. So l'chatchila, the Beis Shloime says that you should not take from him. So if you have a building which is owned by... I don't know, but the schiroi ulekitoi is living in the house. And when it's the goy, when we find a regular schiroi ulekitoi, not that it says that you become friendly with him. No, this specific, they gave a heter to become friendly with him, so you become mash'il leimokim over there, so it becomes as if you have reshus to put your stuff over there. But if you don't have reshus to put your stuff over there, and schiroi ulekitoi does not have reshus to put stuff in the guy's house, and he doesn't live there, and he doesn't get paid, you have a big problem. I don't know if you could actually... If he gets paid, even if he doesn't put anything there... Even if he doesn't live there, that doesn't work. Does not work, no.
So, and if he's not getting paid and he could put things there?
If he's not getting paid, l'chayre does work. L'chayre does work. So now, let's say you have an apartment building which is owned by a guy, or and then the guy has a super who is in charge of taking care of the building. Then obviously the super the owner owns all the public areas, and all the areas over there could become you could rent, do schirus reshus from the super. He's clearly schiroi ulekitoi of the balabais, and a lot of times he lives there. Even if he doesn't live there, he has a place in the building where he keeps his cleaning supplies and everything. So it would work in such a scenario. If you have a building, let's say a condo, which has everybody's owns their own share over there, so you could still say that the super is schiroi ulekitoi of all the owners of the building. Everybody pays maintenance every month, and the super is a schiroi ulekitoi of everybody in the building, and you could be seicher from him on behalf of the goyim.
The goy owns the building.
Huh?
If a goy owns the building, but only you don't live in it, they have to be safe.
Still have to. He owns the public area. He doesn't live there, so you have a different.
He doesn't live there.
Doesn't live there.
If he doesn't live there, it's not a problem.
Doesn't live there, it's not a problem. No, but what happens if you have goyim and yidden over there?
Right.
So if you have goyim and yidden, then you have to do schirus reshus from the super.
When we're dealing with a super, it's independent if the owner is a goy or a yid. You can be a yiddish owner, the fact that the super lives there.
He also has the super already has a.
The super doesn't matter the fact that the owner of the building is a goy if he doesn't live there.
Right.
Even if the owner was a yid.
Yeah.
Well,
Still apply. Yeah. Yeah. If there's goyim in the building, yeah. Unless if the yid owns all owns the building and he owns all the private owns all the areas, then you don't have to schirus reshus from the guy. The yid owns all the areas. A regular apartment building, the yid is the landlord. He owns all the public areas. The goyim only have a right to walk around through it, but it's not their property. They don't have any property rights in the hallways and any of the public areas. Now, the only place in Shulchan Aruch, this is one of the trivia questions you ask people who start learning kids, was the only place in Shulchan Aruch that's a mitzvah to become a friend with a guy, and this is the place. If a guy doesn't want to do schiras reshus, the Shulchan Aruch says, find a Jew who will become friendly with him until he gives him a place where he could put his stuff over there. He tells him, you could put your stuff in my house. Put your stuff in my house, then it becomes. I saw and the Alter Rebbe says you don't even have to. It doesn't yet, even if he doesn't actually put his stuff in the house. It's still the fact that he has a reshus, it's already enough. Based on that, I don't remember who. I saw a more modern sefer from this generation, which says that based on this Alter Rebbe, if you could go over to a guy and tell him that these for religious purposes, etc., he gives you a key to his house, and you hold the key for his house. It's the same thing as you have entry to his house. If you need to, then it also works.
What, for a second you hold it and you give it back?
No, you hold it. Listen, a lot of times, a person, before days that there was codes in the house and everything was electronic, back in the olden days, so you only had regular keys. In the olden days when you had regular keys, so what do you do if you lose a key? Nobody had cell phones. So what you do is you would leave a key by a neighbor. So a neighbor that you trust. And then if you forgot your key, you knock at the neighbor's door and you pick up your key and give it back to them. So it always stayed over there. Some people, you put it in a flower pot, and some people left it by the neighbor. It depends on what it is. If you put it by a flower pot, it doesn't work for schiras reshus. You put it by a neighbor, it does. Fakert, I'm saying if the neighbor puts it by you.
Even if you don't give it to the hold?
No, you tell him that's the reason. You could walk in over there. Now what happens is when he becomes that, the Yid becomes as if he lives in the guy's house, because he has reshus to put his stuff over there, and he's considered the schira l'kitay of the guy, and Alter Rebbe again over here adds sheba beisoid, that's in his house, and therefore he could then go and rent it out to the rest of the Jews in the Chatzir without the guy's approval. Alter Rebbe brings a second opinion that some say you don't even have to. In such a scenario, you don't even have to do schiras reshus to the rest of them. Once you become like a resident in the guy's house without limitations, then the fact that you join the Eid of Chatzeris in the Chatzir already helps for you to be able to become. It already helps for everybody to be metaltal over there. And Alter Rebbe says Yesh lahachamer kisvara harishayna. Now, the Alter Rebbe doesn't go into details. What does it mean over here that you have to do you have to do schiras reshus, and you have to do, or if you just do eight of it's enough? Are we talking about when the Yid lives in the Chatzir, the Yid doesn't live in the Chatzir? The Alter Rebbe doesn't say that the Yid lives or doesn't live in the Chatzir. Do you need to do schirus and eirov, or one or the other? If you look in the Mishnah Berurah of Kotam and Beis, he goes through this whole topic. He says that the second shitta that it's enough to just do eirov and you don't have to do schiras reshus from the guy. That means now that you're schira l'kita of the guy, you don't have to rent it out to other people. It's only if you live in the Chatzir. He brings that the Rashba says that you always have to do eirov Chatzeres if you live in the Chatzir aside for it, because now that you become an owner. Not an owner, you don't become a resident of, it's considered like you're living in the house, then obviously now you're a resident of the Chatzir and you have to do Eid of Chatzeris you have to be mishtatev in the Eid of Chatzeris of the rest of the people. And in Sharat Tzion, Sifkat Memhei, he brings that according to the first opinion, it's clear that if there will be a schiras reshus, if you do this and you become friends with a guy and you live in the Chatzir, you always need both. You need schiras reshus and eruv. No, if you don't live in the Chatzir, then you need both, because now you became a resident in the Chatzir. Once you became a resident in the Chatzir, you have to join with the eruv. But if you live in the Chatzir already, you don't have to make a new eruv. You already joined the eruv, and that already helps for you after you do the schirus from the guy. Now, what's the logic behind this? The logic behind this idea of schira l'kitay, that now that you're mash el mokim in a chatzir, it only works that you mash el mokim, that you have a right to put something over there. The idea behind it is that now this whole house of the guy, or this whole chutzner of the guy, you have permission to put things over there, and therefore you become somewhat of a schirei or lekitei or owner or whatever it is of this property, and now you could go ahead and rent it out to the rest of the people. Alter Rebbe clarifies it for you right away in Sifte Zayin. This only works if the guy did not specify for you a place where you could put your stuff. You tell a guy, can I put a lawnmower in your house? And he says, yeah, you could put it in that closet. You already have a problem. And the only way, but if the guy tells the Yid a specific place, and it's in and the Alter Rebbe adds over there, that you define for him a place in a way that the guy cannot throw you out of that location, because then what happens is now that this room where you put your stuff, if the guy can't throw you out of there, becomes fully, because by she'ela we already know from previously that by she'ela the difference between which she'ela works and which one doesn't is if a person if you get thrown out of the place or not. So if he tells you and he gives you a specific place and he cannot get rid of you from that location where he let you put his stuff, so right now it became again two separate reshuyos. You become a full owner of that room, or a full controller of that room, and the guy is a complete controller of the rest of the house. So you didn't solve anything. All you did was you added another property that the Yid owns in this chutzner, but the guy still owns this property independently, and there is no reshus for the Yid to be able to do, is to be a schirui lekitei, to rent it out to him. And the same thing is if there's a Jew who is not just mash'el makim, but he's actually a real schirui lekitei of the guy. He's a real worker for the guy. And he gets a specific room in the guy's house where he can live, because he's working for him. So he gets a room in the house. But that room is dedicated for the Yid, and the guy is not getting rid of him from that room as long as he's working for him. Then, again, he cannot use that. That's similar to what we learned earlier. If you rent a house, if you rent a part of a house from a guy, then it doesn't count as schirui lekitei, because the guy is out of this property and you're out of his property. So how do you become schirui lekitei with that rental? So therefore, if a Jew is living in a house if Yidden are living with Goyim in the house, in one house, but each one has his own independent room. So first you have to do schiras reshus from the guy, and then the Yidden have to do erev chatzeres between themselves. And if a lot of Goyim live in the place, and each one has his own house, his own room, you have to do schiras reshus from every single one of them, or from each and every one of their schirui lekitei, if from their employees. Otherwise, you're not able to carry in the place. Now, the Mishnah Berurah adds over here that what's the definition of nestalik legamri? Something we already know from other places, and we will see it later on. Mishnah Berurah Sifkat Mem Gimel, that if the guy still has the guy who owns the house still has some form of reshus ishtamshus, so obviously he's not nestalik legamri, and therefore schiras reshus. Therefore, it could work for you to be able to then do schiras reshus. And the same thing, if he has a right to throw you out, that is pretty clear. Sif Yud Zayin,
But if you only have one room, you can't be schirui. You have to have all places. No?
What do you mean? If it's only one room, there's no shaila, because they're both in the same place. It's only if there's a specific place for it.
No, if according to the Torah, there's a specific place, but the guy can kick you out, that works?
It works. You still counts. Yeah. The Alter Rebbe is mashma saying anything else. The Alter Rebbe says, so obviously, if yochel esalkoi, then it's not considered yichud lamakim.
I'm trying to figure out the spot. You only have one room. You don't have the whole house. You're not a schirui in the whole house. There's nothing you're a schirui in the whole place.
Yeah, but the fact that you could get thrown out of there doesn't mean that the nachri was masalik himself from your place. So the moment the Nachar is not masalik himself from your place, so for the Goy, the whole house is one. For you, you only have your room. But for the Goy, the whole house is one. So it means he gave, in his mind, since he's not masalik you, or he has still something to put in your in your room, he's not interested in throwing, for him, in his mind, it's all one, and he let you have some reshus in his one big property, and not that he's masalik himself from it completely, and therefore you can go ahead afterwards and be masked to the rest of the Yidden. Now here and in a bunch of places in Sif Yud Zayin over here and in other places, Sayin, this Siman and in other Simanim, you'll see the concept of renting for a specific amount of time. And obviously renting for a specific amount of time has milas and chesroinus. One of the biggest milas of renting for a specific amount of time is that the goy cannot be chayzer in the middle of the time. So over here is discussing if you rent it from a schiroi ulekitei, not from the actual goy, because the actual goy you already know from before. You rent it from the schiroi ulekitei for a specific amount of time, whether it's a year or 10 years or 5 years, or we'll soon see all the different shittas in it. And the owner went and fired the worker, or the worker died, then the schirus remains in place until the end of the time. Why? Because when he did it, and he was not moiche, means he was maskim, we consider that as if the owner did it, and he is maskim on it, unless he, and he therefore cannot be chayzer b'sei chazman, obviously unless he pays the difference in price. But if it's rented only for an unlimited amount of time, you have a problem, because you could be chayzer after the first Shabbos. And if the guy is fired, or if the schir l'kita is fired, or he dies, you have the same problem as before, and you have to go and do again a schirus reshus. If you go, and Al Rebbe says, if you go and you rent the schirus reshus from the Gizbar HaMedina, from the Gizbar HaMelech, from the one who collects the tax collector of the king, means he's an employee of the king, and the king owns all the land, and then the king went and fired his employee. The same din as before, depends if it's Lizman or not. But if the employee still receives a salary from the king, even though he's no longer the tax collector, then it's still fine.
So
and
said even the oil works. Even if he didn't say stop, he said the oil, he said clearly I'm renting this forever, that also works, no?
For what?
Said that even if you rent this place for oil,
we're in the 1 second. Where? If it's schar l'olam is what?
that's considered like Tzirus Lizman. That it goes.
Yeah, but if it's schirus stam is not l'olam.
Right. So, but Tzirus doesn't work.
So some works, yeah.
You mentioned that if the maskir was not moiche for Shabbat to the schirus.
In Sif Yud Zayin.
What does that do with him being moiche? Schirus could do it even if the bottle.
No, he's explaining why is batla schirus if it's without if it's schari stam.
That's because it's if it's being chayzer, right?
Schari stam, you say that as long as the schir l'kita was working there and he wasn't moiche, we say that the owner also agreed with the action of the schir l'kita. Once the schir l'kita is out of the picture, then we have to make a new one. Until other.
Nothing to do with the master being moiche.
No, he said
Until now, we wouldn't have to make a new one. We have to make a new one because the schirus.
because schirus is cancelled.
If it was, and if it's money, even if the master is moiche,
It doesn't make a difference. No, until he actually is chayzer on the schirus. Yeah, until the schirus is finished. So if the Gizbar HaMelech still receives a salary, it's fine. It's interesting. The Magen Avraham points out over here that even if the tax collector, when you rent from him the schirus, and if when corruption always existed, and that even if the Gizbar keeps all the money for himself, it's still the king obviously knows about it and he doesn't care, and therefore the fact that the schir l'kita keeps the whole rent that you're paying him for the king's properties, it still works as a schirus, even though the king's coffers don't end up with the rent payment.
The person that collects the rent or whatever and works for the king, he also has to have a shtash in people's houses?
No, he has a shtash in the public areas. In the chatzeres. There's no chatzeres. If there's no private ownership, then who owns it? The king. If the king owns it, then this guy has a right in all the he's collecting all the taxes from all these places. He has an entry right to every one of these places.
Just like everyone has an entry right to it.
No.
No?
He has an entry right to your chatzer. It's not your chatzer. You think it's your chatzer. It's not. The king owns it.
So then why can anyone say the king lets certain people use it and people not use it?
That specific person has a right to enter every property.
Who cares who owns it? If the guy owns it and doesn't live there, again, there's Akum is like a behemoth.
But you need to have we need to have. Who are you going to do schiras and shus from?
No one lives there. Only if the guy lives. The whole takana is when a guy lives with you.
Yes, but now you have a bunch of goyim. What are you going to do? And you can't go to each one of them.
Okay, fine.
You have a bunch of goyim, so you go to Gizbar Malach and you get from him for everybody.
Why would just previously we said you rent from every single guy?
But if you have a schir l'kita that represents all of them, then you're fine. I heard a good svara.
It doesn't represent them. It represents the king.
He represents the king, and the king owns all the land.
Their own houses.
The own houses also belong to the king.
The whole Siman show would be just
No, because they have the king lets them be there, and he dedicates for them a place. So they have a right to do it. I just see an interesting svara, and I don't know how much of a mucker it is, how much you could rely on it. That when you pay taxes to a city, then the employees of the city that are paid from your taxes become the schira l'kita for each one of the people in the city who pay taxes, and therefore you could do schira l'kita from the person who collects the garbage or anything of that sort.
But they all have to have ishtamshus in the actual place that you're being masking.
They come and they take the garbage from your house. Yeah, not from inside your house, but from your chatzar, yeah? Or you put it by the entrance of your chatzar, yeah?
When the person stops being
Stops paying taxes, you have a problem.
It
Yeah.
doesn't work. It has to be that give a base.
Yeah.
Garbage is no good.
Yeah.
Unless you only master the place for the garbage.
Yeah, that's now you could rent again. Al Terah here says you could do schiras shus from the Avdei Hamelech Haktanim Shebeveisoi. Again, Al Terah points it out, and even from Avodei Avodav. That means if the schira l'kita then goes and hires, the king doesn't hire every single person, or even a boss of a big company doesn't hire specifically every single person down the whole line. There's or even an owner of a big house. If a guy owns a big house, schira l'kita, he has one person who runs the whole maintenance of the house, and that person is in charge of hiring a gardener and hiring a plumber and hiring a bartender and hiring a cook. And in the big properties, some of them might be living there the whole time. It's not in America, it's not so common, but in other countries it's still common. And therefore it becomes schira l'kita. So even Avodei Avodav also works over there.
All these people have to have ishtamshus in the melech's place or in every...
In the area. Each one has his job. It's not specific. The owner of the house doesn't tell the cook that you're the kitchen I don't walk into. He doesn't want to walk into it, he doesn't want to get dirty, but it's still his. He never gives up rights to it. As a result of this, that when you have a zman, a term on your schirus, it solves some of the problems. So a lot of poskim say that whenever the schirus and shus, it should always be for a specific time frame, whether it's for 1 year until you do the Eid of Chatzeres or for longer. There's different opinions. For example, the base Shloimeh, Chelik Aleph, Siman and Aleph says up to 50 years. There's Ira Kodesh V'Amikdash of Tekochinsky says in Yerushalayim they would do up to 60 years. The Shas Keren Ledovit says that really 10 or even 20 years, even a little bit more, a little bit less, is not a problem, but he recommends between 5 and 10 years. So people, whoever did the Schiras Shus, shouldn't forget about it. It should be completely abolished. And he says you have to write down in the Pinkas HaKehillah when the Schiras expires, so you know when to do it again, because otherwise Could be the next Gaboy, we're not going to know about it, and the people who are charged with the kill are not going to know about the Schiras Reshus that was done, and you're going to have a problem. He says, when you're renting from a kingdom, even 100 years or more also works to do even such a long-term thing, because as long as a kingdom exists, they will keep their commitments. Now, what happens if a kingdom is abolished? There's a revolution. There's a new owner to this kingdom. Then l'cha'ira, you have to do Schiras Reshus again. Even if you did it for 100 years, they will not honor the previous king's commitments. Obviously, that's why they got rid of him. And we could compare it to it's obvious the same thing as a guy who did Schiras Reshus, then he sold his house to somebody else, or he died and there was a Yerush. When a guy has 5 Schirim Ulukitim, which are Yidnas and Sifrit Ches, and each one of them has a room in the house, and he could throw them, and he could throw them out, etc. He could throw them out. Then there is 2 kulas over here. Mitzad Echad, we say that one Yid could serve as the Schilei Lekitoi to rent it out to the Chatzar, to all the Yidden of the Chatzar, so it shouldn't be a problem for Eruv. Mitzad Sheni, we say that each one of these 5, they don't have to do, they're not oyser one another, because they're all part of only one. You don't have to go from each one of them. They're not oyser zalzah. Yeah, and now if one guy rents out to another guy, and that the owner of the house no longer has any tfisas yad, any way of entering the place, then you have to do Schiras Reshus from the soicher, from the guy who rents the house. But if he still has some right to go into the house, then essentially you could rent either from the landlord or from the tenant or from any other employee, because the tenant, since the owner still has a right to go into the house, the tenant becomes like a Schilei Lekitoi. So you can rent from the tenant. You can rent from the owner because the owner is the owner of the house. You can rent from either or, and it will still work. Now, it's interesting, Mishnah Berurah Sifkat Nun Aleph, that if you have about this topic, if you have a house that's owned b'shutfus, Yidden and Goyim, a Yid and a Goy own the house b'shutfus, and even though the Yid has a right to go into every single place in the house, he is not considered a Schilei Lekitoi. Each one of the partners has equal rights to their Schilei Lekitoi, means that he is secondary to the owner, and therefore he has a right to be masked. The Yid over here, when he's a partner with the Goy, he has equal rights to the Goy, and therefore equal ownership, or even not equal ownership, but he's an owner, he's not an employee, and therefore you cannot do Schiras Reshus, even though the house is not separated into 2, but it's owned in Shutfus. You have to have each one of them, you have to get from the Goy Schiras Reshus. This is especially since the Goy cannot just fire the Yid or throw him out of the house, etc. So therefore you still need to get from the Goy. Now what happens if you have a partnership, but the Yid is the one who is the managing partner? That means he's the one who could call the shots, or he's the one who could bind the owner. So then, even though he's a partner, l'cha'ira, he does have a right to do Schiras Reshus, because he has the legal power to bind the owner and to be able to sign on his behalf. And the last seif in this סימן is about we'll call it the first something similar to a hotel. If you have a ship which is owned by a Goy, and there's a lot of Yidden who each one rented a room over there, and each Yid has his own room. They have to do an eruv each one between themselves, the Yidden who are on the ship, and they also have to rent from the Goy or from his employee. Or they could tell him that we're including inside our rental, we're renting the rooms inside this schilas of the room, inside our price for this vacation. We're also including the rights to rent all the public areas, so we are able, all the areas that belong to you, so we're able to carry. If they did not do it befeirosh, then it does not work. The Alter Rebbe again follows the same idea of it all boils down to bevese and all that he has to live over there. It says obviously this is only talking about if the guy has a specific room, the owner has a room in the ship where the Yidden cannot put anything over there, and he as the owner cannot go into the rooms that were rented out by the guests, because that way each one's mesulak one another and it becomes as two independent reshuyas. But if it's fakert, if he has a right to put things over there, or he doesn't have a room over there, if he has a right to put things over there, then it is not a problem. And if he has a right to put over there, then each one of them could become a schir l'kitay of him. And bechlal, that's what we discussed in a previous shiur, a few shiurim ago before Pesach, that is one of the reasons for the heter of a hotel, even if it's owned by a goy. Now, what happens if you have not only the owner, but you have a bunch of goyim inside this ship? So, and we're following the same conditions that each room, the goy owner cannot go into the rooms of the other people. Then you have to do schiras reshus from every single one of the goyim. It's all Mishnah Berurah Sivkot 9 Vav. And the only way to avoid it is if you do schiras reshus from the goy before the guy divided the rooms to the guy. That means you go to the guy and you tell him, I want to do schiras reshus for all the areas. That means the first day before he designates a room to each guy that becomes their room for the trip. And that way it could work, because then you did the schiras reshus before, and the fact that he then went and gave another guy reshus, he can't be chayzer stamaz. It's doesn't count as chazara. But if he already divided the rooms between everybody else, then you have no right to then you have to do schiras reshus from every single one of the people, because every single one of them has his own independent room. And